So welcome to today's seminar on making retirement plans simple for the small employer, presented by the SEND Alliance. We thank you for taking a few minutes to log in with us and recognize that retirement plans can be confusing and super hard when it comes to getting some good guidance, especially when we're trying to figure out what's the best decision for your employees. Today, we hope to exchange valuable information and guidance to make this hour worthwhile for you. My name is Rob Lockard. I am the Chief Talent Officer and CEO at M&AO HRC, your host for today's webinar. My firm is a member of the SEND Alliance and one of the sponsors for today's webinar. A couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker. At the bottom of your screen, you will see two buttons, a chat button and a Q&A button. We ask that if you have questions or comments during the webinar to please use the Q&A function only to ensure that we do not lose track of your questions. We will be addressing all the questions at the end of our session. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our presenter, a definite subject matter expert in the field of retirement plans, Troy Redstone. Troy is a fee-only retirement plan consultant, an accomplished public speaker, published author, and behavioral finance expert. He designs and manages financial wellness programs and ERISA employer-sponsored retirement plans, including 401k and 403bs. He brings with him a number of certifications, including a certified plan fiduciary advisor, a certified behavioral finance analyst, a certified financial education instructor, and an accredited investment fiduciary. As the founder of PhD Retirement Consulting, he lives in Kansas City with his bride of 25 years, his son and daughter when they're home from college, and an Aussie doodle named Dixie Belle. With that, I will pitch the webinar over to Troy. Troy, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Thanks to everybody for taking some time today to join us. So today we're going to talk about 401k plans made simple, or simple 401k, simple plans made into 401ks. So this is kind of an executive summary, and I'm just going to tell you right up front the questions that we're trying to answer that might help you understand kind of where we're trying to get to, and hopefully this is where we arrive at. But this time together really is about trying to help businesses figure out the right type of retirement plan to put in place for your employees, right? And as a small business owner, you're going to have multiple options. Now, the primary options, though, are going to fall into one of two categories, either a 401k or a simple IRA. There are other options like SEP IRAs and SAR-SEPs and iterations like that. We're not going to get into those weeds. We're going to talk about the primary options that small employers are going to use. It's either going to be a 401k or a simple IRA. And the big questions that we hope to answer is which option is best for you. So as we compare the pros and cons, you're going to understand a little bit better how these plans work and what the best option might be for you. We're also going to help you try to figure out, if you started with one and you want to convert to the other, what conversions look like. Maybe this is obvious, but you're not going to be converting from a 401k to a simple. It's going to be the other route. So some people do start out with a simple and then later decide they want to convert that to a 401k. And so we'll talk about that. So which is best, the 401k or the simple IRA? Which is the best option for you? I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently by asking another question, really. And that's going to be the question of, what are we trying to accomplish? This is one of my favorite illustrations. I love this picture because basically it's really all about what's our goal, right? So imagine you've got a big patch of dirt. You've got some kids playing out there and they're playing soccer. And one of them kicks the ball so high that it goes sailing over the soccer goal and it goes through the basketball goal. Great. How many points is that? 0, right? Because if they're playing soccer, you don't put it through the other goal. And so I think knowing what your goal is everything in this. So our goal for the plan is going to fall into one of three categories. And I guess I would suggest maybe all three are really, really important. So the first reason why people even have a retirement plan at their employer is going to be to attract the right kind of people. I mean, if you're recruiting people, you're saying, hey, this is our company. We want you to come be a part of our team. and we've got a retirement plan. So to attract and retain, because you want to attract and retain, those are the primary reasons for a lot of people, but I would add a third: to attract, retain, and retire great people. That's why you even offer a retirement plan. So the question really is that best met by a 401k or a simple IRA? That's the question. If you're attracting people to your place of employment, you're trying to get people on your team, and you're hiring them, and you're telling them as part of the recruitment process, hey, we've got a simple IRA plan, there's going to be at least some people who are going to say, a what? I've never heard of that before. So I'm going to guess that almost everybody on our call today has heard of a 401k, even if you're not like real well versed in what a 401k is, or how it works, or even why it's called a 401k. By the way, it's called a 401k because it falls under IRS code 401. That's where the name comes from. But you may not know that. You may not necessarily have the intricacies of what a 401k is, but you've heard of it. So if you're recruiting people to your team and you say, hey, we've got a 401k, that's probably going to help you with attract, retain, and even retiring. But what about a simple IRA? So let me spell out what a simple IRA is, because I don't think that's as well understood or as commonly understood. By the way, it's an acronym, and you're going to find out almost everything that comes out of Washington is an acronym, right? So SIMPLE actually stands for Savings Incentive Match Plan for Employees Individual Retirement Accounts. So it's actually an individual retirement account, an IRA, but it's specifically an employer-sponsored type of an individual retirement account. So here's what you need to know about a simple. It's simple, like super simple. It's going to be less. It's going to be easy. That's why you put a simple in place. It's less rules. There's less bureaucracy. There's less oversight. There's less administration. It's easier. There's less fiduciary liability. If you're an employer and you're sponsoring a simple IRA, it's less trouble. Really, it's less trouble. And it's easy. There's no testing. There's no filing requirement. You have to file a tax form if you have a 401k. But with a simple IRA, it's easy. It's super easy. There's less cost. That's really important when it comes to money, right? There's less money spent on expenses. It's just easy to get money into the plan. The employee contributions are easy. They just kind of go right into the plan. Employer contributions, they're easy. Now, depending on which side of the table you sit on, right? Employer contributions are guaranteed. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing if you're the employer, because they're guaranteed that you have to make those. You obligate yourself to the employer contribution. If you're an employee, that's great news. Like your contributions go in, that's easy peasy, and the employer contributions go in, and that sounds super great, right? And you're also immediately vested in that money. Now, that's also good news for the employee, but not necessarily so good for the employer, for those folks to be immediately vested in that. The thing I think, though, that is often misunderstood or overlooked is the employee does not have the ability to build money in an after-tax Roth contribution. This is huge, because when you put money into a Roth contribution, the money grows tax-free. When you put money into a pre-tax contribution, you're going to pay taxes on that money when it comes out. You're going to pay taxes on what you contributed, and you're going to pay taxes on what the earnings are on that. So a Roth contribution is huge in terms of being able to build wealth. And if you've got a simple IRA, you don't have the ability to do Roth. So keep that in mind. Yes, it's less. Contributions are less. In fact, how much you contribute to a simple IRA is less. You can't contribute as much in a simple as in a 401k, so it's less. It's just less. Getting money in is easy, but getting money out is not necessarily so easy. I mean, there's no loan options on a simple. There's even a 25% tax penalty for taking the money out early, for early withdrawals. So it's easy to get money in, not so easy to get money out, and not as easy maybe to build as much money. And let's be honest, building a whole lot of money is kind of the point, right? So building a whole lot of wealth, getting as many people as possible to save as much as possible, that's the reason you do a retirement plan. That's going to help them retire better. You're going to do it to attract and retain, but then if they're building a lot of wealth, they're also going to retire, attract, retain, and retire. So I personally think that's going to be a lot easier to do inside of a 401k. And I think most people would agree It is easier to do inside of a 401k. It's easier to get money put away because you have higher contribution limits. So the employees can put away more money. They're also able to put away Roth dollars, which is huge. Being able to put away tax-free earnings kind of a thing in Roth, it's huge. Getting money back out is a lot easier because you have loan options, you have hardship distribution options. So it's a much better tool for getting money in and getting money back out. It's also a great tool for retention. So you don't want to just attract, but you also want to retain. It's a great tool for retention because of this thing called a vesting schedule. So there can be a vesting schedule, like they have to work there maybe 3 years to get all the money or 5 years to get all the money. I'll try, by the way, to not throw a bunch of crazy terms, or I'll try to define them as I run across them. But vesting is something that they talk a lot about in 401k world, and basically it's just ownership of the money. Like when an employee contributes to the 401k, whatever they contribute, they're always 100% vested in because it was their money. But if the employer matches them, they're not guaranteed to be 100% vested in that. It may not be theirs until there's a period of time that goes by. So you can tie it to a 3-year vesting schedule, or like 4 years or 5 years or whatever. If you tie it to a 5-year vesting schedule, the basic idea is you're putting free money in their account. They have to be there at least 5 years to get all of it. That's kind of the idea. It basically just guarantees that you're not going to have somebody coming in and taking your money back out. You want to make sure that they're going to stick. And so it makes the employee situation stickier. It makes retention a whole lot easier. I think it's a whole lot easier to also get the money to grow, because in a 401k, you're going to have a whole lot more exotic investment options. Okay, you're going to have exchange traded funds. You're also going to have collective investment trusts. You're going to have mutual funds that represent multiple fund families. So like in a simple IRA, you might have just one fund family. Like that simple IRA might be sponsored like by American funds, that's going to be the American Fund Simple IRA, and it's all American funds. And American Funds is a great fund company, but you don't want all one fund company in your 401k. And in your 401k, you have a lot more diversification options, and it's just different than the simple IRA. You often have better investment options and lower cost investment options. So the 401k is just, it's better. I mean, I think most advisors, most ERISA attorneys, most people that understand the workings of a simple or a 401k would agree that a 401k is better. Most employers would agree that a 401k, it's more sophisticated. It's more sophisticated. But I will tell you this, with greater sophistication comes greater cost, right? And that's true in this case as well. With greater sophistication comes greater complexity. So there's no arguing that one is better than the other. It's just that you have to understand sometimes there's a higher cost or more complexity from one to the other. So this obviously is a picture of Jaguar, or yeah, I guess the way the British pronounce this is Jaguar. That's sophisticated. It's just more sophisticated than a Chevy Spark. By the way, that's not a slam on Chevrolet. I actually Googled what was the cheapest new car sold last year, and it was a Chevy Spark. So Chevy Sparks are just not as sophisticated, but they cost less, right? So it's a trade-off. I think it's worth the trade-off, and I'm going to look at the cost and the complexity and let you decide for your particular situation. So let's break these down. First of all, with the cost, you've got some help, and believe it or not, the help's coming from Washington. I know it surprises me as well, but Washington wants to help small companies and employers get started with a 401k plan. So there's this thing that came out at the end of 2019 called the SECURE Act. It's another acronym. It came out of Washington, right? So they're acronyms. So SECURE actually stands for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. So it is actually a provision to help employers get started with a 401k, and they do so with what's called a tax credit. So here's essentially the way it works. Every single employer out there has $500 to start a 401k. Okay, great. $500, that'll get you started, maybe. But you have another $250 for every single employee up to 5,000. So for those doing the math at home, that means 20 employees. So if you have 20 employees or more, you're going to qualify for the entire $5,000. The other thing too, though, is that Washington also wants us to use what's called automatic enrollment. And if you're using automatic enrollment, it's an additional $500. By the way, that's another term, so I should stop and just define what that means in case you're not aware of it. But every single retirement plan out there, every 401k plan at least, will have some type of a default. So the default is either to be in the plan or to be not in the plan. You either default in or default out. It's called an opt-in or an opt-out. So an automatic enrollment or an automatically enrolled plan, basically that just means that people are opted in unless they opt out. We can't make people save for retirement, so they can choose not to if they want to. But if they don't do anything at all, which some people just don't do anything at all, then they will be in the plan. It's called an opt-out. They have to opt out if they don't want to be in it. It's automatic enrollment, and if you do that, it's an additional $500, up to $5,500. And so that basically is just for the first year, and this will extend over a 3-year time period. So $16,500 for a small company to start a 401k, to start a retirement plan. Okay, now this is what we do. So I help companies of all sizes with setting up 401ks or with managing their 401ks, and $16,500, it more than covers the cost for an employer to get started with a 401k plan. So it's a really, really great provision. Cost doesn't have to be the issue. What about the complexity though? Here's what I will tell you. There is no higher form of law in our land than what we call fiduciary laws. In fact, it's as scary as it sounds. When you're a fiduciary, you're legally responsible for someone else's money. If you're an employer and you sponsor a retirement plan, you're legally responsible for the plan assets, and that's their retirement, it's their family's retirement. It's a big, big deal, and the liability is huge. The liability of a fiduciary is governed under a body of law that we call ERISA. By the way, it's another acronym. So this is going to be the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, ERISA. And ERISA basically outlines or governs the fiduciary responsibility of a plan fiduciary. So if you're an employer that sponsors a 401k, you become a plan fiduciary, okay? ERISA outlines what your responsibilities are. It also outlines the ways in which you can mitigate a lot of that liability. Not all of it, but a lot of that liability. You can do what's called discharging the fiduciary liability if you follow certain guidelines. So a plan fiduciary needs a plan fiduciary advisor, okay? So, and I'd actually would recommend like a certified plan fiduciary advisor. This is a very, very specific certification in our industry. It basically means that you're licensed, you're certified to be a specialist in plan fiduciary matters, and basically to be a plan fiduciary advisor. Very few financial advisors are also plan advisors or plan fiduciary advisors, and not all plan fiduciary advisors or plan advisors are certified plan fiduciary advisors. So this is something to look for. If you're ever trying to set up, like say, a personal account, like you're trying to set up a brokerage account, or you want to find a financial advisor, you want to find someone who is a CFP, a certified financial planner. So the equivalent to a CFP is a CPFA, a certified plan fiduciary advisor. So strongly recommend that you look for that. ERISA is going to outline the fiduciary responsibility of a plan advisor or a plan fiduciary. It's also going to recommend the ways in which you can mitigate some of that or discharge some of that. The primary reason is going to be under what we call ERISA 316. So ERISA 316 is an administrative fiduciary. An administrative fiduciary, if you're the plan sponsor and you're sponsoring a plan, you are the plan administrator, big P, big A, plan administrator. And if you hire an ERISA 316 administrative fiduciary, you can actually find someone who will be the plan administrator. So this is a huge mitigation of fiduciary liability. Someone who actually signs the Form 5500 for you. Someone who actually takes on legal responsibility for the administration of the plan. It's huge. Another thing that's really important under ERISA is what's called an ERISA 338 investment fiduciary or investment manager. Another thing is ERISA 321 co-fiduciary or an investment advisor. So there are a variety of ways in which you can discharge the fiduciary liability to outside parties. There's a cost, obviously, for doing so, but it will simplify the plan, and it will help with the administration, help with the liability, things like that. So back to the idea of just the law when it comes to these kind of things. If I'm talking about hiring an outside advisor, the rule of thumb in terms of hiring and outsourcing fiduciary liability is that whatever you're paying that person, that it needs to be fair, and it needs to be reasonable, and it needs to be necessary. So this is not a place to cut corners. The liability, fiduciary liability for an employer is huge. And I would even go so far as to say that if you have like an insurance broker or someone who's kind of like a financial advisor for the plan, if they're not willing to serve as a fiduciary, I don't care what they're charging. It's not fair, reasonable, or necessary. So cheap is not the route to go here. You know, you don't just want to say, let's get as cheap as possible, because there's a lot at stake. I'm going to break it down a little bit further and just kind of show you how a 401k works. And I think it'll become obvious kind of the different seats that are at the table. If a company wants to start a retirement plan like a 401k, the very first thing they want to do, and I like to do this, I do this in person, this seminar generally in person. I ask people in the audience, like what's the first thing you got to do to start a plan? And I get all kinds of answers, and it's not often understood that what you really need, the very first thing you need, is a retirement plan committee. Like I've had people argue with me, oh no, I think the first thing is you got to have a plan document. Like you don't have a plan until you have a plan document. Well, that's true, but the plan document is going to outline whether or not the plan has loans, whether or not the plan has a vesting schedule, what is the vesting schedule. So there's decisions to be made in the plan document. Your retirement plan committee is presumably going to make those decisions. So the retirement plan committee is stepping in on behalf of the employer to oversee how the plan works. Now, as soon as they do so, as soon as you set up a retirement plan committee, they become plan fiduciaries. And as we've already said, a plan fiduciary, they need more than anything a plan fiduciary advisor. I would strongly recommend a certified plan fiduciary advisor. It's a very specific designation in our industry. But even if they're a certified plan fiduciary advisor, they still don't actually custody the funds. They still don't actually handle the money. You still need what's called an outside record keeper. They're the ones who keep track of the money, send the quarterly statements to the employees, and things like that. Your record keeper is generally going to be one of three types of things: either a bank, a fund company, a mutual fund company, or an insurance company. So that's the record keeper that keeps the funds. And in some instances, the record keeper has outside administrative work, like the testing and accounting that kind of has to be done, that they don't do themselves. And so they bring in another party as well. It's called a third-party administrator. So if you're watching and you're thinking, I've got a simple IRA right now, this is sounding really complicated. It is. Like there's a lot of layers, there's a lot of different people, and there's a lot of different roles when you're talking about the 401k. I'm personally not a big fan of having a third-party administrator if they won't be what's called an administrative fiduciary, the ERISA 316 administrative fiduciary. So if they're going to serve as an administrator, but not an administrative fiduciary, then they're adding cost, but they're not adding value. So you want to try to make sure you have an ERISA 316 administrative fiduciary. It's also possible for your certified plan fiduciary advisor to serve as an ERISA 338 investment fiduciary. And it's also possible for them to serve with the committee as a co-fiduciary, an ERISA 321 co-fiduciary. So our goal is to make sure that you have all three of those seats filled. If you have all the seats at the table filled, you've mitigated as much liability as you possibly can. Not all the liability, but as much as you possibly can. That's a really, really important thing. I want to dissect that a little bit further, because I think it's often misunderstood, the difference between the 321 and the 338, and that could be a whole separate webinar, to be completely honest with you. But let's look at the 338. That's the person who just looks at the stock market all day, watches how the investments are doing, and actually manages the money, okay? So what is an investment fiduciary? What is fundamentally the difference between a 321 and a 338? The difference is really one of discretion. So a 321 can absolutely be an investment advisor who gives advice about the investments, but a 338 has discretion to just change the investments without even talking to the people who are invested in those funds. So do you have discretion? Do you want to outsource discretion over managing the money, or do you want to have some say in how the investment decisions are made? 338 does it for you. Is that a greater mitigation of risk? It is, but the thing to keep in mind is, I think the thing that's even more important is the administrative fiduciary role. So I've done this a long time. When the regulators get involved, they're not generally looking at investments, they're generally looking at administration. By the way, regulators, when I say regulators, what I'm talking about is IRS and DOL. So the IRS and the Department of Labor, and they're the ones who are regulating the retirement plan, whether it works right and things like that. So when you're talking about regulators looking at the plan, they're not generally looking at a plan saying, gee, your large cap growth fund isn't performing so well. What they are saying though is, did you get notices out on time? Did you make contributions in a timely fashion? Did you do the administration correctly? Did people's money come out when it was supposed to and go in when it was supposed to? All of the administrative things. That's what companies get dinged for, is what we call procedural prudence, the administration of the plan. That's why I think the administrative fiduciary is way more important than the investment fiduciary. And I can say that because I'm not an administrative fiduciary. I don't have a dog in the fight, but I do think it's a really, really important role to fill. But ultimately, either way, ultimately it is more cost and more complexity. There's no doubt about it. Even when you're outsourcing all these things, because it is so complicated, it is so complex, it's more cost. So the question that comes, and it's a fair question, is it worth it? If it's going to be more cost and more complexity, is it worth it? I'm going to answer the question by going back to our original question, which is, what's the goal, right? I mean, are you trying to attract and retain and retire? And if so, if that's the goal, which of these is going to help you do that? Simple IRA does an okay job with some of those things, but not all of those things. And a 401k is going to do a better job, generally speaking. I think if you have a big job, you need a big boy plan. That's what I believe. I think to get the right people on board, you got to make sure that you have the right kind of benefits. So Teddy Roosevelt, anytime you can bring Teddy Roosevelt into a presentation, that's a good thing, right? So Teddy Roosevelt said, big jobs usually go to the men who prove their ability to outgrow small ones. Okay, so I think the 401ks are just more sophisticated. They're more, and they're a better option in most cases. It's just a question of whether or not it's worth the cost and worth the complexity. But it's more, and you will outgrow the small one at some point if you haven't already done the outgrowth of that. And that's what we're talking about. Is let's say you start a simple IRA. At some point, you're going to outgrow it because it doesn't hit your goals of attracting and retaining people, or it's not sophisticated enough. Or quite literally, you literally outgrow it because of the number of employees. I mean, you cannot sponsor a simple IRA if you've got 100 or more employees. I mean, you need to have a small number of employees to actually offer a simple IRA. So 100 is the magic number. So you will literally outgrow the simple IRA if that's the route that you started with. Which brings us to our second point, which is, how do we reverse paths? This slide says how to convert a simple IRA to a 401k. You know, how do you change directions if you're going the wrong way? But here's what I want you to hear, and hear me on this. I'm not saying you're going the wrong way. I'm not saying that when you made a decision to use a simple IRA, it was a bad choice. What I mean to say is that it might have been the right choice at that time, but you've outgrown it. So a lot of small employers, they'll start with a simple simply because it's simple, it's easy. But they'll quickly decide this is just not sophisticated enough. And they want something that's going to work better for the goals that they have for that plan. So how do we reverse paths? Well, I will tell you, it is all about timing. It's all about timing. There are 3 steps to terminating the simple IRA plan. The first is to notify your employees. They have to have 60 days notice, and then notify the plan's provider. So whatever company is providing that simple IRA, and then maintain records of all that. Notice that I did not say notify the IRS. So it is not necessary for you to tell the IRS, we're no longer going to do a simple IRA. But you should maintain records in the event that you're ever audited. So get the notices ready, send those to your employees, let them know you're not going to do a simple IRA anymore, and then you can start the 401k. You can't sponsor a simple IRA and a 401k at the same time. So they have to be one or the other, and it has to be done right at the end of the tax year. So this is the perfect time to do so. If you want to actually have a plan in place by January 1st, if it's going to be a safe harbor plan, a safe harbor 401k, they have to receive safe harbor notifications 30 days before the beginning of the plan. So let's say December 1st. And if it's coming out of a simple IRA before you start the 401k, they have to be given 60 days notice that the simple IRA is not going to be in place. So that's November 1st. Okay. So the best time to start is now. Like, the time is good to get going right now. The best day to start is today. And the only day that would have been better than today is yesterday. So you've got to get while the getting's good. Like, you start the plan now, or you start the conversion now, or you wait and the flight leaves without you. And look, there's nothing wrong with waiting. I just want you to understand, you can't kind of labor over this and then get into the next year and decide, gee, this is keeping us from growing as a business. It's keeping us from attracting and retaining our team. We need to get rid of our simple IRA. You can't do that mid-year. So you either make the decision now to terminate the just terminate the simple IRA, or you wait until next year at this time. So it has to be done right at the end of the tax year or right on the break between those two. So now, let me just, in conclusion, let me just kind of compare the two real quickly, a simple IRA and a 401k. So simple IRA, why or why not? Okay, what are the pros and cons of a simple IRA? Why simple IRA? Well, it's simple. It's for small companies. It's really, really simple. It's slightly lower in cost and it's less complex. Okay, why not? Why not a simple IRA? Well, first of all, you're 100% vested in the simple IRA, so there is no retention. I think it might be harder to attract people in a simple IRA because they don't even know what it is when you're trying to recruit them, and it's way harder to retain them because there is no vesting. So attract and retain are two of the big goals of why you even have a retirement plan, and you can't do that with a simple IRA. So that's a reason maybe not to do a simple IRA. I think personally, from like a wealth building tool, the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things, is not even being able to have Roth contributions. So not being able to have Roth contributions and have the ability for the money to grow completely tax-free, it's a huge bonus that you lose in a simple IRA. In a simple IRA, you generally have one fund company. They're retail share class, not institutional. And that may not sound like a big deal, but it's kind of a big deal. Like, you can have the exact same fund, and the retail shares of that fund are more expensive than the institutional shares. It's like the difference between retail and wholesale. Like, you'll find something at Walmart, it's a pretty good price, but then you find it at Sam's and it's even better price because it's wholesale. So 401ks are institutional wholesale pricing, if you think of it that way. IRAs, simple IRAs, retail, they're going to be more expensive. So what about a 401k? Let's look at the pros and cons, because there are cons also. Let's look at the pros and cons, what I call the why or the why not of a 401k. So why a 401k? Well, your employer contributions are not mandatory. So that's going to matter to the employer because you're not required to put money in. You're obligating yourself under a simple IRA. You have a lot more freedom as an employer on matching or how you match or profit sharing or all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more flexibility with the money, even for the employees. Like, you could put the money in after tax Roth. So flexibility on putting money in, flexibility on taking money back out. You have loan options, you have hardship distribution options. So there's a lot more bells and whistles with the 401k. So why not? What's the downside of a 401k? Well, there's the complexity, right? There's testing, there's filing. You have to test the plan for discrimination. And there's the filing, the Form 5500 filing, which you never had as a simple. So if you're going from a simple to a 401k, you now have a tax filing, and that's a big fat responsibility, and it's going to add administrative cost and trouble and such. So you got to make sure that you're understanding all of that. And the 401k ultimately might cost more. It very likely could cost more. It's just there's more administration. It's more complex. I will say, and we don't have a lot of time to kind of go down this path because it's not really the purpose of this particular webinar, but there is this provision under a 401k to have what's called a safe harbor 401k. And that's a little bit of a different nuance of a 401k that actually resolves some of the common objections of a 401k. So I'll touch real quickly on why or why not on a safe harbor 401k. Why? Well, first of all, you get a pass on testing. Now, if you don't have a 401k currently and you're just considering this, or you're in a simple IRA world and you don't understand how this works necessarily yet in 401k, you do need to understand that your 401k is going to be tested for discrimination. The easiest way that I know how to explain that is to say that they want to make sure that the owner is not being adversely benefited and hurting the employees. Like the employees don't really get much out of the plan, but the employer gets a lot out of the plan. So they test it to make sure that the employees have the ability to put away every bit as much as the employer. If you have a safe harbor 401k, you get a pass on testing. You don't even have to worry about the testing. It means you can make maximum contributions for those that are highly compensated, which is presumably the owner or the highly compensated employees there at the place. And there's going to be less cost in the 401k. So if a simple IRA is less expensive and a 401k is more expensive, a safe harbor 401k is a little bit less than a normal 401k. It's less administration, it's less cost, it's just easier. I will say you're 100% vested in the safe harbor contributions, so that does kind of pull back a little bit on the whole vesting benefit that you get under a 401k, and it may still be a little bit more than a simple IRA. So it's not as much as the traditional 401k, but it's a little bit more than a simple IRA. So I can't read your mind, but I would imagine you're saying, well, pros and cons, you're back and forth, and you're probably completely confused at this point, right? I mean, which is the best thing for you? So I'm going to try to break it down as easy as I know how. The easiest thing in the world is to say, first of all, if you don't have a plan, you have two choices. You could do a simple IRA or you could do a 401k. And pretty much most employers, most ERISA attorneys, and most plan consultants are going to tell you that a 401k is markedly more sophisticated, like way more sophisticated. You're going to say, yeah, but it's more complex. It is, absolutely, it is more complex. But we address that by discharging a lot of those fiduciary duties. You're going to say, yeah, it's more sophisticated, it's better, whatever, but it's also more cost. It is, but we address those things under the Secure Act. So here's what I would say. If you have a simple IRA and you're thinking about moving over to a 401k, do not do that unless you're prepared to discharge the fiduciary duties and make sure that you have an administrative fiduciary. Otherwise, you're stepping up tremendously in the amount of work, the amount of liability, and the amount of trouble it's going to be for you. You have no idea, because you've been in simple IRA world, you have no idea how much more difficult the 401k actually is. So it's been easy up till now. Don't take shortcuts and try not to have the fiduciary duties discharged, because that will be a mistake. So that's if you don't have a plan. You have those two choices. What if you do have a plan? What if you do have a plan and you chose to have a simple IRA, and now after learning more about it, or deciding that you've outgrown it or whatever, you've decided, yeah, I'd really like to convert that or upgrade that to a 401k. So you chose a simple IRA. Now you're thinking about upgrading that to a 401k. Okay, that can easily be done. The first thing to keep in mind is it's all about the timing. It's all about the timing. And the second thing to keep in mind is there is a lot of complexity. There's a lot of moving parts here. So don't do this alone. You want to make sure that you're hiring an expert, a certified plan fiduciary advisor who can actually walk you through all these things. I would even go so far as to say that the current financial advisor who set up the simple IRA is most likely not a plan fiduciary advisor who specializes in discharging all those fiduciary responsibilities. So most likely your certified plan fiduciary advisor doesn't even work with a simple IRA. So if you have a simple, you may need to look at a different path to try to make sure that your 401k doesn't set you up in a way that's going to like adversely impact your business. Okay, so Rob, I assume that you've been monitoring the line. I don't see those here in front of me, but have we had any questions that have come in or anything that we need to clarify with any of the things that we've talked about?
Well, yes. First, we do have one, but before I jump into that one, I want to remind everybody that if you do have questions, to make sure that you do put them down there in the Q&A box for us. That'll help us to be able to kind of make sure that we work down through our queue pretty quickly and efficiently for you. And while folks are doing that there, Troy, I do have one question from Don. Don says, you mentioned that the contribution limits are higher in a 401k than in a simple IRA. What exactly are the limits?
Exactly. Is this stump the chump or well, a couple of ways I would answer that. First of all, whatever it is, it changes every year. Okay, so I know we're putting this on tape or video, and so someone might be watching this at some future time. So you'll want to Google what is the 401k contribution limit, what is the simple IRA contribution limit. The 401k is definitely higher, and you're calling me you're calling me out, Don. So I'll just tell you, this particular year you can contribute $19,500 in your 401k, or if you're over age 50, you can do all the way up to $26,000. Now, that's a huge benefit, being able to put away $26,000. In a simple IRA, it's only $13,500. So if you're only putting away that much, you may not be able to replace your current lifestyle in retirement. You may not be putting away enough to actually build enough wealth to actually save enough. Okay, so so the 401k has a higher contribution limit. Those are simply the limits for this year. And I don't know, when you might be watching this, those of you that are watching the video later. So I will say, you should probably consult your accountant or Google that, because but it is indexed periodically for cost of living. Maybe it's just increased periodically. So does that help?
Yeah, I appreciate that there. It has definitely helped us to kind of get a couple more questions here. So Nick is asking, he says, it sounds like stepping from a simple IRA to a 401k is a huge step up in complexity. So are you suggesting that it's not as big a step if you discharge the fiduciary responsibilities or just duties?
It's a fair question. So that gives me a chance to say something that'll make the attorneys really, really happy. So let me back up and say this. It is not possible for you to ever discharge all of your fiduciary liability. Like, it's just not possible. If you're an employer with a 401k, you're a plan fiduciary. That's why this is a big fat deal. That's why you don't want to just contact your stockbroker or your insurance agent, or you really got to take this seriously. There's a lot of fiduciary responsibility. So yes, if you're going from a simple and you're stepping into 401k world, yes, you are. It is a huge step. Is the step not as big if you're discharging the fiduciary liability? I don't know that. I wouldn't say it's as big. I guess I would just say you're mitigating a lot of liability to your company. Like you're an employer, you're sponsoring a 401k. Good for you, right? You're doing this wonderful thing for your employees. You don't want to do this wonderful thing and then invite all of this liability and risk back on the company because you've exposed yourself to unnecessary risk. And so you mitigate a lot of that liability. You don't mitigate all of that liability, but you mitigate a lot of that liability by discharging the fiduciary responsibilities, as we mentioned previously. There's certain things that can be discharged, but even if you discharge all of those, you still ultimately have the fiduciary responsibility of hiring a fiduciary, right? So you still are a fiduciary. You're a fiduciary who hired a 316 fiduciary. So you still are a fiduciary, but you mitigate risk. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe it sounded like a little bit of dancing back and forth, but I just want to make sure no one hears us to say that if you discharge that you're no longer on the hook, because that's not what I'm saying.
That's a big thing there. So Matt is asking, he says, can you review the transition timeframes for us again?
You mean transitioning from a simple to a 401k?
Yeah, that's what I'm reading that as.
Okay, so so the big thing is I'm trying not to make this overcomplicated, but the big thing is that they have to be in different tax years. So the 401k doesn't have to start January 1. The 401k could start anytime next year. It could start in March. It could start, May 12th. It could start anytime. But if you're gonna have a 401k next year, you can't have a simple IRA in the same tax year. So the simple IRA is in one tax year and the 401k is in the other tax year. There has to be a break. Okay. So the time frame is you have to give employees 60 days notice that they're no longer going to have a simple. So if they're not going to have a simple IRA next year, then you need to start that process like now. They need to be given 60 days notice that they're not going to have a plan next year. And that's really, really important. There are ways in which you can even start a little bit later in the year. I hate to say that, but just to be completely forthright, I need to make sure that you understand if we bleed past November 1st, you could do that, but then the 401k doesn't start until later in the year, but they have to be in different tax years, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the 60-day notice is pretty standard. Like you need to have a standard employee notice saying that 60 days from now, you will not have access to a simple IRA, but we're going to replace that with a 401k. And then you can have the 401k set up.
Gotcha. So I actually have been, sitting and listening to everything today. And so I've got a question. It's really kind of on behalf of some of my HR friends. So if I was going to move my company from a simple IRA to a 401k plan, and I've always wondered this, do all the plan assets, does everything move all at once? Like, is there a magic date kind of thing?
No. And that may not even make sense to someone if they're not already in 401k world. So I'll answer the question like this. If you have a 401k and let's say your provider is like XYZ company, and then you decide, hey, we'd rather work with ABC company. As a trustee, you can scratch a check or scratch the signature on a contract. And as a trustee, you can move the entire 401k all at once. Like the employees can't say, hey, I don't want to go to ABC. I don't like ABC. No choice. Like they can move the entire 401k at work. That is not the way at once. That is not the way it works with a simple IRA. So remember, the imperative word in simple IRA is the IRA. It's an individual retirement account. So the employees can't be told that they're going to move their money over to the 401k. So you might have a simple IRA that's like $2 or $3 million. And then you have a 401k that starts out at $500,000 because $2.5 million didn't move. Like they don't have to move their money. It's completely individual choices, which is why it's really important that someone who understands how to make that transition is involved in helping them make that transition over and understand why. There's a lot of education involved. When you're getting rid of the simple IRA, you're effectively terminating one plan. Okay, so as soon as you terminate the plan, that's a distributable event. Okay, how do you get money out of a retirement plan? Retire, termination, or disability, or death. And so, but if the plan itself is terminated, it's a distributable event. So as soon as that plan is terminated, Susie might say, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going to roll this money into my 401k and start contributing there. And Bob might say, I've been wanting to buy a Harley. Here's some extra money. And he could just take the money. It'll come with a tax penalty, but he could take the money. So it's not just a one fell swoop type of a deal. There's even a provision that talks about how there's a 2-year rule in terms of the rollover if they haven't been in the simple IRA long enough. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, Rob. You can't just say, oh, we're all going to move over to the 401k. Generally, when folks bring us in to kind of coach their employees through this, the employer, the boss, the owner, the CFO, whatever, they say, yeah, we need to make this move. And they say, okay, we need your team, Troy, to come in and kind of convince the employees that we're all going to do this, because they don't have to do it. So there's education involved in trying to help them understand why.
Gotcha. I don't see any other questions coming in at this time. So I think we could probably go ahead and wrap up and start to transition there a little bit. And of course, thank you for your time today, Troy, and you sharing your knowledge with us. I really enjoyed the comment about Teddy Roosevelt, one of my history favorites there, from that perspective. But I do want to let everybody know that as we do close down on the webinar today, that they will be asked a survey. In the survey, there are going to be 2 questions that do help us at the Send Alliance to ensure that we are bringing topics to conversation that do actually meet with what you're looking for, your needs. And so these 2 questions will kind of be brief, nothing too in depth there. But we do encourage you to continue to be able to look out for next month's webinar when we get to that point. Again, Troy, thank you so much for your time and being able to share your knowledge here. And I want to make sure that we save some time here on the back end to ensure that we're doing everything that we need to do.
Well, you're talking about the fund compliance. So
yeah,
I will just say that I'm sorry to jump in, but I will just say that we do want to make it clear that while this is a lot of great information, because I don't think it's always real well understood for employers, this is not intended to be, it's educational in purpose. It's not intended to be financial advice, tax advice, or legal advice. We talked about Roth contributions, for instance. I think Roth is a great way to build wealth, and I'd love to have a conversation with you offline about that. But if you're not sure if Roth's right for you, talk to your accountant, because it's going to be different for everybody. I can't even say like just across the board that every single employer out there ought to have a 401k. I think the 401k is like markedly more sophisticated. It's just way better than the simple IRA. And yet there are some employers, based upon maybe the number of employees, the projected growth, how much they're contributing to the plan. There are some employers that might say, a simple IRA is really ideal for us. I think because of the Secure Act, we've answered some of the questions or some of the objections as to why people might make that jump, but I still can't just across the board say, yes, it's the best thing for everybody. So this is just educational in purpose, and the attorneys like for us to remind everybody that this is not intended to be financial advice or legal advice. But you see my contact information there. Our website is fee only 401k advisor, and we have a toll-free number, 844-PHD-401k. So you can reach anybody on our team, and we can talk to you a little bit more about your particular situation and just talk about whether or not it's the right thing for you or not. If I could just leave you with one thought, it's just the idea that if you're laboring over whether it's the right thing or not, the timing is super duper important. Like, this is the time to consider this. So let's have a conversation now while the getting's good. Like just let's consider it this week or next. Let's talk, give us a call, email me directly. If it's not the right thing for you, then just put it back on the shelf, put it on the back burner, address it again next year. But if you don't want to have to not have the option because you waited too long. So you got to strike while the iron's hot, right? So this is the time to consider this. So with that, I'll just thank you so much for Rob for having me. Thanks for hosting, and thanks to everybody who's tuned in, either live right now or watching the recording later. So we appreciate your time. I know your time is valuable. Hopefully this answered some questions, and this was a good use of your time and just putting together some of the pieces for you as a business owner. So we wish you well. Let me know if you have any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Troy. And I look forward to seeing everybody again next month.